Hello and welcome to our special coverage of the Russian invasion of Ukraine. I'm Ladi Akari. The headlines. Ukraine's President Vladimir Zelensky reiterates twin goals of regaining territorial integrity and releasing all Ukrainians in Russian captivity. Head of the Kherson Regional Military Administration, Yaroslav Yanushev, says Kherson city was attacked 23 times in the last 24 hours. And Russia dismisses Ukraine's calls for UN Security Council removal. Ukraine's President Vladimir Zelensky has declared his country a global leader in a speech to parliament, telling lawmakers to remain united in the face of Russia's invasion. Mr. Zelensky, in an annual speech held behind closed doors because of Russia's war, said Ukraine's military resistance against the Kremlin had reinvigorated a belief in values across the world. Mr. Zelensky also told Parliament that Ukraine had secured the release of 1,456 prisoners of war since Russia invaded, the result of a series of prisoner exchanges with Moscow. Mr. Zelensky said the Ukrainian war effort had helped consolidate and unite the European Union as well.
The goal to regain the territorial integrity of Ukraine always goes hand in hand for us with another goal, to release all our people who are held in Russian captivity or in prisons, as well as those who were forcibly deported from our land. And since February 24th, our team managed to release 1,456 people from Russian captivity. We have to rebuild from the ruins the territory which Russian occupants invaded after February 24th. Similarly, we will be restoring normal life in the territory of Ukrainian Donbass and Crimea, which were illegally occupied in 2014 and since then have been brought to disaster by the occupiers. It is still difficult to estimate the necessary amount of resources, but we can say for sure that we must prioritize the restoration for those companies that were in Ukraine or came to Ukraine during the war. Ukraine became one of the global leaders. Our national colors are an international symbol of courage and invincibility of the whole world. In any country, on any continent, when they see blue and yellow, they know that it is about freedom.
Ukrainian President Vladimir Zelensky. And as fighting near the key Ukrainian city of Kreminna in the eastern Luhansk region continues, the Russian civilians who had come to the city have stopped their work and left. Serhiy Haidar, the head of the Luhansk region military administration, said the military command has indeed moved from Kreminna to other settlements. All the Russians who came to work, the civilians, doctors, repair teams, they've all stopped their work, all left for the Russian Federation, and all the work that was started is now frozen. Mr. Haidar adds that if the Russian military is able to dislodge the Russians from Kreminna, the Ukrainian military could then proceed in two directions. Mr. Haidar said two of the largest cities in Luhansk region near Kreminna, Severodonetsk and Rubishne, have been practically destroyed by Russian forces over 4.5 months of occupation, and therefore these cities cannot be any big defense bases. And Russian attacks on Ukraine's southern Kherson region continued over the past 24 hours, injuring 3 civilians. According to the head of Kherson's regional military administration, Russian occupiers shelled the territory of Kherson 50 times. Peaceful settlements of the region suffered from attacks from artillery, MLRS, mortars and tanks, adding that the city of Kherson was hit 23 times in the past 24 hours, with 3 people sustaining injuries of varying severity. In November, Russia's military retreated from Kherson city, the only regional capital Moscow had captured since the invasion began, in a major setback for Russian President Vladimir Putin. Since then, Russian forces have stationed themselves across the river from Kherson and regularly shelled the city from there. On Tuesday, a hospital maternity ward in the city of Kherson was hit by Russian shelling, according to Ukrainian officials. And Ukraine has been facing a wide assault on critical infrastructure and power sources since early October. The electricity transmission system operator in Ukraine, Ukrenergo, said in a statement that as of December 28, that was yesterday, the electricity deficit in the system had increased, and that this was due to the stop of some units of power plants due to the shelling of gas infrastructure in the eastern region. The company added that the deficit did not mean further power restrictions because of relatively warm weather, but the available capacity in the system is not enough to meet all the needs of consumers in the country. In this regard, all regions were informed about consumption limits, the excess of which leads to the need for emergency outages. In the past 3 months, the power grid has suffered 9 missile and 12 Russian UAV attacks. Russia's foreign ministry has slammed Ukraine's calls to remove Russia from the United Nations Security Council, and that's according to the Russian state agency TASS. The Ukrainian foreign ministry, in a statement, said that the Ukrainian foreign ministry had said that Russia should both be excluded from the Security Council and from being a member of the UN as a whole. But Ukrainian President Volodymyr Zelensky had called for Russia's expulsion from the United Nations in the past. Russia's foreign ministry spokeswoman, Maria Zakharova, dismissed Kiev's statement, saying, "Do nothing. This is precisely the case when dogs bark, but the caravan moves on." Ms. Zakharova made the comments to Sputnik radio station in response to a question on Moscow's reaction. All right, now let's talk to Peter Dickinson, who's publisher of Business Ukraine magazine, Lviv Today, and editor at the Odessa Review. Good morning to you, Peter. Thank you for your time. Compliments of the season, in as much as it is, given the situation.
Good morning. Yeah, thank you for having me.
Let me begin from the situation itself. What is it like? We're just a couple of days to the new year. All the reports are about massive shelling and aerial bombardments, energy infrastructure being affected, and people fleeing for cover. Some, in fact, live in cities and, in fact, leaving the country. What is it that you can tell us about that?
Well, as we speak at this very moment, Ukraine is under attack from what may be the largest missile attack so far of the war, certainly since the initial barrage on the first day of the war. The reports that we're seeing in the last half an hour or so is that around 120 missiles have been fired at Ukraine or are being prepared to be fired this morning, which would make it the largest barrage to date. So at this point, we are experiencing yet another morning of terror. Ukrainians are taking cover. My own family here at my home is in our improvised bomb shelter area under the stairs. People around the country are huddling in bomb shelters. They're in their apartments in bathrooms so that they can maximize the distance from outside walls and windows. It is obviously a very, very uncomfortable and nervous experience. But having said that, people are used to it. I am not actually seeing a lot of data that large numbers of people have left the country or are leaving the country now. Of course, at the beginning of the war, there was a massive outflow, millions and millions of Ukrainians traveling to the EU mostly. Recent months, I've not seen anything comparable to that. People, on the contrary, have to a degree adapted their lives as best they can to this air campaign. But of course, we are living, as well as the terror of the air attacks themselves, we're living with the consequences, which is a massive deficit of electricity. People are generally having to make do with electricity for between maybe 4 and 12 hours a day, so around half the day at least as a minimum without any electricity. It's cold. The temperatures are around zero or dropping far below zero at times. So people are lacking heating in their homes, they're lacking light in their homes, they're sitting in the darkness and the cold in many cases. So it's extremely uncomfortable. Not a very festive season for Ukrainians, but there is a strong sense of resilience. People are still saying, you know what, we will go on, and it's making people more determined in a sense to win the war.
quite a number of people I've spoken to have said that this barrage of missiles, these attacks, are based on two things. The first is that, of course, because of the weather which you referenced, it's difficult to move people and material across territory in Ukraine. So as a substitute, if you like, the Russians are firing these missiles, which, of course, can defy weather. But that the whole idea is to soften up the Ukrainians in such a way that they are more amenable to negotiations of some sort or the other. Now, I must then ask you, is there a possibility, perhaps, that if the conditions were right and or if there were no conditions, it is possible to sit down? There are so many people who are saying that, look, there still needs to be a sit down, even if it's to talk about talks, there still needs to be some kind of sit down to look at this conflict, particularly because there is the temptation that while this is on, a lot of other equally potentially dangerous situations are unfolding elsewhere.
Well, all wars end in negotiation at some time or another, and this war will be no different. At some point, people on both sides will have to sit down and will have to find some sort of basis for peace, for a sustainable peace for the long term. But I think the key word here is sustainable. At this point, there's no indication whatsoever that Russia is interested in a sustainable peace with Ukraine. Yesterday, the spokesperson for the Kremlin, Dmitry Peskov, said very clearly there can be no talks with Ukraine until Ukraine accepts the loss of 5 regions of the country, around 20% of the territory. So obviously, that's a non-starter for any Ukrainian. The Ukrainian government cannot condemn approximately 6 or 7 million Ukrainian citizens to endless Russian occupation and all the horrors that that entails. So the Russian position is pretty intransigent at this point. They insist on annexing and basically claiming a large portion of Ukraine. That's their basis for talk. So it's no basis whatsoever. From a Ukrainian point of view, Ukrainians are suffering. The country suffered terribly over the last year. It continues to suffer. There have been terrible losses both in the civilian population and amongst the military. Now the entire country is suffering from these blackouts, from lack of electricity and heat. Obviously, this is not even touching upon the terrible economic damage that's been done. But Ukrainians don't see any real room for negotiation with Russia at this stage. Russia's been very clear that they intend to destroy Ukraine, essentially, that the Ukrainian state should not exist in its previous form, that territory should be ceded to Russia, and that Ukraine should no longer be allowed to function as an independent state. So Ukrainians really have very little choice but to go on. Added to that also is the fact that they've done very well militarily in the last 6 months. They've managed to recapture around 50% of the land that Russia initially gained. So there is also a sense in Ukraine, A, we can't afford to lose this war, and B, we can win this war. So there's a sense that they must carry on, that they must carry on, and they can carry on.
There is, of course, I must make reference to that, even though it's now happened just over a week ago. That visit, flying visit, if you like, by the Ukrainian president to the United States, far above every other country, the United States is possibly the main reason why militarily the Ukrainians are able to stand up to the Russians today. And that visit tended to put a face to those that were being helped, if you like. Many people have called it a public relations coup, particularly because Mr. Zelensky was able to come back with some real wins in terms of the Patriot missile defense system and even more aid. The United States is primed to send an additional $45 billion in aid over a period to Ukraine. But do you fear some level of fatigue, perhaps, not just on the part of the United States, but on the part of other allies like the European Union and NATO and the other countries that have been providing help and support militarily and humanitarianly to Ukraine? Because, as you said, this is almost a year on.
You're quite right to say that the American support has been crucial. I think it's been absolutely essential for Ukraine. They've provided a lot of weapons that have been decisive in many of Ukraine's engagements over the last 6 months. They've also provided very important intelligence information, which has allowed Ukraine to make some of the advances or to enhance the Ukraine's advances. So American support has been absolutely crucial. And the recent visit by Zelensky was a demonstration of that. It's the first time he left the country since the invasion began. He's been very specific up until this point that he will not leave Kiev or at least not leave Ukraine. That's been a very important part of his leadership, that he's been here with the people. People have taken that as a very strong sign that Ukraine will stand and Ukraine will resist. So it was a very symbolically important moment that he actually left Ukraine for the first time and he chose to go to America. That was no accident. Ukrainians were very anxious before the midterm elections in America in November that there would be a swing towards the Trumpist wing of the Republican Party. That's seen as the most unenthusiastic section of the American political establishment in terms of support for America or for Ukraine. So there was a lot of concern that they would do very well in the midterms, and then there would be a downturn in support for Ukraine. But that didn't happen. Actually, what we saw is that Trump candidates lost mostly. The more Reaganites, the more conservative, more traditional Republican wing of the Republican Party was victorious, and the Democrats did very well as well. So actually, the results were quite favourable for Ukraine. So there was no real sense that the American support for Ukraine was actually on the line. But of course, fatigue is an issue as the war goes on. Fatigue is an issue in America. And in the EU and in Europe and amongst all of Ukraine's partners and the international community in general. So this visit was a very important sort of pick-me-up, a sort of morale booster sort of sense to say, listen, we want to show not only the work that the American public, but also the wider world that the alliance that's been built in support of Ukraine, especially with by America essentially, also sort of led or centered on America, remains strong and will remain strong. And in that sense, it was a great success. The visit was seen as a huge success in Ukraine, and people were very, very encouraged to see the reception that Zelensky received in America, how he was lauded and how triumphant essentially it was. It was a very important piece of political theatre.
Peter, I know you touched on it in your answer to my very first question, where you talked about the economic consequences of this. You mentioned that in passing, because most of the news headlines are about the missiles, about the humanitarian aid, about the refugees and so on. But you're a business person, and within all of this, there's got to be survival. You've got to put food on the table, buy fuel, get medicines, arrange for the children's schooling and all of that. What is that like given this kind of situation? Because it is important to put a face to this. It is important to take a look at how this goes on day by day, even with all the other things that we have already discussed. What is it like on a day-to-day basis along these lines, business and family?
Well, I think from a business point of view, I can certainly say, my business is essentially on hold, and many businesses are on hold. They're simply being put on the shelf, as it were, because it's just not feasible to run many types of business. Some sectors of the economy are less impacted. For example, the Ukrainian IT sector, which is a significant part of the economy here, has actually thrived over the past year. Has actually experienced in some segments of the industry is actually seen growth remarkably, largely because they're working at distance with foreign clients and they don't necessarily need to be physically present in offices, and they don't certainly have production facilities, etc. But most sectors of the economy have been either shut down or physically devastated. The damage has been huge. Ukraine is a huge export-driven industry, economy, agriculture and resources, raw materials, and they've been basically blockaded to a high degree. The ports are blockaded. Some grain is able to leave, but that's about it. Road transportation out of Ukraine to the EU has been maximised, but it's very limited. It cannot replace the volumes that would go out normally in a peacetime period via the country's southern ports on the Black Sea, Odessa, and other major ports. So the economy has been essentially crippled. It's on life support, really, and it's very much dependent on international aid to remain functioning. Government relies month to month, day to day on international financial aid. Now, of course, we hear a lot about military aid, but the financial aid is almost arguably as important. That aid keeps the economy ticking over and allows the government to maintain basic functions, to pay basic social functions, to make sure that teachers, doctors, law enforcement, all government officials are state workers are receiving salaries and social payments are made. So that is actually, the economic situation is desperate. But having said that, there is a certain level of stabilisation. It's gone down a degree, but it's kind of found a new lower equilibrium, and it's meddling along. I talk to people every day in business. A lot of them have found ways of sort of making things operate, have found ways to keep things ticking over on a minimal level. They've often reduced salaries, for example, to minimal levels, but made sure they didn't actually have to relieve all their staff. They keep staff on. The other thing you mentioned, children. Well, the main thing for children, in my personal experience, I have 2 children. I think the main thing is trying to protect them from the trauma of the war, to try and keep life as normal as possible. My children have been in school all through the autumn term. They've been at school virtually every day. They have a bomb shelter at school, so very often, almost probably every other day on average, they spend a few hours in the basement bomb shelter area, but it's essentially just an alternative classroom for them now. They seem to be quite okay with that. They don't seem to be, they don't display any signs of trauma or stress, but of course, you have to be careful, and it's not clear exactly how that would show itself. It may be something in the longer term, like this morning is a traumatic time. They can hear the explosions going off as the air defense rockets fire and then missiles hit. So you do worry about the trauma they've gone through, and people who are living on the front lines, of course, and closer to the day-to-day battles have gone through absolutely life-changing traumas. And Ukraine, if this war, when the war ends, it will end, of course, at some point. When that happens, we are talking about a lifetime of psychological damage and care that will be needed for the children who've lived through this.
A very grim situation, Peter Dickinson. I'm almost at a loss to say that one wishes you a happy new year. One can only hope that in 2023, this situation is somehow resolved so that you can get back to your regular lives and your regular business. But for now, I guess it's just enough to say warm regards at this time, and do stay safe.
Thank you very much. Happy New Year.
Happy New Year. And still to come on the program, energy giant ExxonMobil sues the European Union to block energy windfall tax. Please stay on with us. Thanks for staying tuned. Welcome back. Ukrainian officials are calling on residents to evacuate the city of Kherson as Russia continues its attacks on that location. Some residents who lived through the Russian occupation are reluctant to leave, according to a local official who has been involved in helping residents with the evacuations. Local Kherson City Council member Dmitry Podobini said, quote, "I'm telling these people that Kherson is one of the most dangerous cities right now. So I asked them to imagine that they are going on vacation for a couple of weeks. It may be easier for them to decide to move this way, but still a lot of people are staying in the city." Local authorities knocked on some residents' doors, convincing them to leave Kherson because of intensified Russian attacks. In the meantime, the Office of the United Nations High Commissioner for Human Rights says at least 6,884 Ukrainian civilians have been killed since Russia's invasion of the country began in February of this year. According to the Office of the United Nations High Commissioner on Human Rights, the figures compiled up to December 26th include 429 children, which it believed hid the actual numbers, which it suspects are much higher. It adds that nearly 11,000 people have been injured. Let's talk now to Dapo Thomas, Professor of International Relations at the Lagos State University, who joins us virtually. Good morning to you, Prof. Compliments of the season, and thank you for your time. Professor Thomas.
Good morning, Nadi.
Good morning, Prof. Thank you for joining us. The situation continues to be.
Morning.
Yes, the situation continues to be grim, as we have been reporting. Even though the end of the year is supposed to be a time of reflection and possibly good cheer that one made it through the whole of the year, but that's not the case in Ukraine. Can I ask you what you think is the strategy? My last guests, of course, did detail the conditions under which Ukrainians are living right now. But do you think that this desire to retain their statehood could and would triumph over any adversity that they may be going through as the situation becomes worse and worse and worse?
Well, obviously, they have no. If you have no option, if you don't have any other option of surviving this kind of tribulation, then your will will serve as a kind of resilience for you. So that's what's happening in Ukraine. And in any case, the Israelis have demonstrated this over a long period of time. Kind of situation where it's still disputable and controversial that they lost their land and then they had to regain it. So it was their will to rebuild their state. It was their will to go back to their state. It was their will to come up with a modern Israel. And that was exactly, and don't forget, Zionism started in 1997, with Thomas Husband, until they realized their full ambition in 1947-48. They never relented. So I believe that the Ukrainians will also get over this. The Ukrainians will get over this. The Finnish did it before when this same Russia attacked Finland, around 1945-47. So it's going to be a very long drawn tribulation, but I believe that their will, their capacity to stay alive, their capacity to retain their sovereignty, their capacity to remain Ukraine, will definitely see them through this kind of this moment that they are going through.
Do you think it is possible for Russia to be expelled from the United Nations Security Council and from the United Nations in general, as Ukraine has requested? Its president had been saying so for quite a while, but they filed a formal request through their foreign ministry 2 days ago.
Well, this was my first submission. I can remember when I had this a lecture on this with Rotary Ikeja, Rotary International Ikeja. My first submission, because I have already done the calculation that with Russia in Security Council, there is virtually nothing that could be done. So I mooted the idea and I said, look, I said it openly. It was even reported, by major newspapers and electronic media. So that is the only sensible thing that could be done. Without Russia being removed from the Security Council, it's going to be difficult because the country will continue to veto every resolution of the council. So any progress, for any progress to be made in this kind of situation, two things have to be done. And the first thing is either Russia withdraws from Ukraine, because this is an invasion. Even your program is Russia invasion of Ukraine. So this is an invasion. An invasion is an aggression. It's not allowed in international relations, or it's not even allowed. It's not allowed. Yes, you can do it, but you will face resistance. And very ridiculously, Lavrov was even talking about the Ukrainians stopping their stupid resistance. How can you call somebody defending his country? You are also acting on the fact that you are defending your national interest. So if US should deploy I mean, the kind of munitions that US is giving to Ukraine will definitely be met with resistance. I mean, with some kind of recrimination, if because of your own national interest. So if you have the right to protect your own national interest, and you are asking the Ukrainians to stop their stupid resistance, can you see the contradiction? So until Russia is removed, and I think maybe 1 week or 2 weeks later, after I made that submission, Anthony Blinken also made the same submission, that by suggesting that Russia had to be removed. That's the most sensible thing. So those are the two things that could happen, that could stop this war. Russia withdrawing from Ukraine, or Russia to be removed from the United Nations Security Council. Otherwise, this war would continue like this, because the Ukrainians have nowhere to go. That's their land. So any form of resistance they are going to put up, and there is nothing that can stop this genocide. In any case, it has even bordered on genocide. It's already a genocidal invasion. So it's only going to take a matter of time for Russia to be tried for genocide.
Prof, but can Russia be actually removed from the United Nations and the UN security? Are there provisions, for example, in the UN Charter or in the UN document establishing the institution that allows for a Security Council member's removal from the Council, or for a country's expulsion from the United Nations as a body?
Okay, I recognize the fact that there has been no precedent to this. Nothing like this has happened before. 2, it's only an insinuation that a member of the Security Council cannot be removed. Anything can be done in international politics if you are to arrive at a kind of corrective measure, like this. Because the instrument establishing the United Nations Security Council possibly never envisaged a situation where those that are regarded as custodians of peace and global security, that one of them would at a particular point in time carry out aggression against a very weak state, very small state like Ukraine. Russia now attacking Ukraine. So it's possible. Yes, it has never been envisaged. There is no precedent to it, but it does not mean that it cannot be done. I mean, if it is done, it is done, because you have 5 members of the United Nations Security Council. Nothing stops the 3, US, France, and Britain. Nothing stops them from meeting that idea, and that is the end. So what will happen is that in the long run, or maybe in the immediate situation, China and Russia will go their way, and then the 3 will also go their way. So it is going to create a kind of conundrum that we have never envisaged in the international system. But it does not mean it cannot be done. It can be done. Only that the 3 nations would definitely have to prepare for the fallout. US, Britain, and France will have to prepare for the fallout, but it can be done. There is nothing that prevents a member from being removed. Nothing at all that says that a member of the Security Council, if found denigrating or, in fact, creating problems for the system. We are talking about global security and global order, in this kind of situation. And then it is that same country, member of the United Nations Security Council, that is expected to protect and to ginger, you understand, this and to engineer global security that is causing insecurity for the system. So it can be done. There is nothing that prevents the 3 other nations. If China does not want to go their way, then the 3 of them can go their way. That they have the majority. So anything can be done. Anything can be done. It's not sacrosanct. Membership of the United Nations Security Council is not sacrosanct. It can be tampered with. It is not even the status of the membership of the United Nations Security Council that is now driving Russia. It is nuclear. it is nuclear because it knows that it can be removed and nothing will happen. But it's just alluding, it's just relying on the fact that it's a nuclear power, and then it can do and undo. And then nobody, no nation wants nuclear war. But if it happens, that is the only solution to this kind of thing, and then it cannot be prevented. Why not? Why not?
But Prof, I must ask though that if, as you say, it is possible, anything can be done in the realm of international politics and international diplomacy. But I ask the question: does that not make the world a far more dangerous place if these custodians, as you call them, of world order are then split up? There's no forum where they meet anymore. The Russians and the Chinese go their way, perhaps, and then you have the Americans, the Brits, and the French going their way, probably supported by Germany and a number of others. Then you are back to a world based on camps, and it will only be a while before we have a major conflict, because both sides will not believe that the other side can coexist with it.
For any, I mean, we call it systemic change. You call it systemic change. Don't forget that we had the European concert of European power before, which was a multipolar system, and then we later had the bipolar system, and now we have unipolar. Supposedly, we have a unipolar system. So for any system, for any change in the system, there will always be war. That is a theoretical construction or understanding. For any change in the system, there must be a war. So if it results, then because already there is a war, it's only that it's not global. But if one party, the more powerful party, is now saying that it's not going to leave this weak state alone until it kills all of them. Don't forget, Ukraine's population is 40 million. So what you are saying in essence is that we should wait until these 40 million people are killed, and then we'll now be going into the kind of Rwanda crisis that we went into. You understand? When millions of people were slaughtered. So yes, we don't want a situation. Yes, it's going to be a very tough, a long drawn battle. At the end of the day, there must be something. Something must give way. You understand? I'm not advocating for this kind of crucial change. I'm not advocating for this kind of change or this kind of deadly change. I'm only saying that two options are available, and I would prefer the first option. The first option is for Russia. A lot of damage had already been done to the Ukrainians, and then number one, because they have to talk. I mean, I'm sure you had the annual speech of Zelensky when he was talking about rebuilding Ukraine. So they have to spend a lot of money. They have to spend a lot of. They have lost people. They have invested their blood. They have invested a lot of things in this kind of unnecessary project. So if Putin decides to choose the first option by withdrawing, it's good for the world. But if he says, okay, this is it, because those are the two options, I can't see any third option. Those are the two options. The third option is also going to result in war, and that is if for instance Russia makes the mistake of sending missile into any of the NATO territories, then the other NATO members would have to fight against. Will have to come against Russia. So, but that is not. I don't see that. Where anything is possible, so it can happen. So if that is another option that he prefers, then that's okay, because that means it's going to be Russia and and NATO alone. So China may say, okay, I'm not going to get involved, because China itself has something to contend with, and that is why it's also makes you trouble in over Taiwan. So China has its own Taiwan problem, Taiwanese problem, and they don't want to get involved in anything. But if it becomes global, I don't even know, but I think it's a kind of strategic miscalculation by China if it supports Russia, because everything they have built, the two nations, including Russia and China, everything they have built when they have achieved in terms of development will going to be erased, because they will never come out of the war the same. I mean, the same way, because the US is a very troubleshooting nation, and a nation that will never accept to be defeated. We never allow themselves to be defeated. So
Professor
it's not
Dapo
going to,
Thomas,
they won't come out of this war. Yes.
Prof, thank you so much. We've completely run out of time, but I want to thank you so much for this perspective. A lot of food for thought there, and as we prepare for the new year, I'm sure that those who are watching this and analyzing, of course, have taken that on board. Thank you for your time and compliments of the season. Happy New Year well in advance to you and yours. Thank you for your time.
Thank you, Lord. The same to you. God bless you.
And when we return, White House renews commitment to Paul Williams' release on a 4th anniversary of his arrest. Join us again. Thanks for staying tuned. United States energy giant ExxonMobil is suing the European Union in a bid to force the bloc to scrap its new windfall tax on oil firms. A windfall tax is imposed on firms that benefit from something they were not responsible for. Energy firms are getting much more money for their oil and gas, partly due to supply concerns as a result of Russia's invasion of Ukraine. But Exxon accuses Brussels of exceeding its legal authority, calling the measure counterproductive. ExxonMobil reported a quarterly profit of almost $20 billion in October. In September, European Commission Chief Ursula von der Leyen announced the plan for major oil, gas, and coal companies to pay a crisis contribution on their increased 2022 profits. A 33% tax on this year's profits was announced, which was more than the 20%, which was the average for the last 3 years. But Exxon argues that the levy discourages investments and undermines investor confidence in a challenge filed at the EU's Luxembourg-based General Court. Well, it's all about money, so here's Ini John Mekwa. Morning, Ini.
Good morning.
India and Russia have begun settling bilateral foreign trade in rupees. Well, they told us they were going to do this at some point, so now they've formally begun.
They have started. They started it yesterday, formally started yesterday. And the interesting thing is not just with India, there are also neighboring countries like Myanmar, Mauritius, Sri Lanka. So we're talking of a new world order. We did talk about, competition, and the way some people captured it is to say there's now shortage of dollars. Okay. So people are looking for a way out. You know that dollar has been surging for a while, and that has that has made a lot of currencies. We saw the euro drop. We saw in the UK also the pound dropping. With the surging dollar. So it looks like people are looking some other way now. It was first of all rubles, but now it's not just rubles. Now it's the rupee, and the world used to have one uniting currency, but that new world order seems like it's taking shape now. We don't know where it will settle, since we have if we have ruble here, and guess what, India is also trying to get Africa into this, to also trade with them in the rupees. I don't know how available that would be if the dollar couldn't go around. I don't know how available the rupee will be.
Yes, that would be an entirely different
exactly
question. Now oil prices ticked down. They've ticked down, and that's because what was being expected in terms of huge demand from China opening up has been deemed.
Yes, and the case with China is really sad. We've heard of a lot of countries, including the United States, talking about bringing up back restriction to Chinese travelers.
Right.
And of course, that is also affecting production in the country. And just when, the Chinese, they had some protest asking that the restriction was too harsh. And then by the time the government listened to the people and started reducing those restrictions, then we see deaths and surging numbers, and now countries are threatening, to curb or at least restrict movement into the country from China. So we don't know where the government, and I think they were announcing that they were going to pull down total restriction for travelers into China.
Coming in, yes.
So I don't know how they're going to react to it now, but it's certainly affecting oil prices, because we know China is a huge consumer of oil, and so once their production goes down, then it goes out. Also, interesting that the winter I don't know. Expectation for demand for winter has started going down now. Even though the winter is still on, there's expectation that, it's going to go down. And so things like gas and oil.
Yeah, the natural gas prices, they've also dropped.
Yesterday was like, I mean, the drop was so huge. Like, I think the lowest since March.
Right.
You know, so it's just, and that's just an expectation, because this morning, the price of natural gas is up again by 1%. Just between yesterday.
So there's this continuing volatility.
Exactly. Yes.
Wow.
Yes.
That's a bit tough. Ini, thank you for that.
Thank you.
We'll have, of course, much more details along with the crew right after this on Business Morning and later on Business Incorporated. Thanks, Ini.
Thank you for having me.
Let's take a quick look at other news. The Biden administration has renewed its commitment to secure the release of Paul Whelan on the 4th anniversary of his detention in Russia, as Mr. Whelan's family expressed hope that he would not mark yet another milestone in a Russian prison. U.S. Secretary of State Antony Blinken said in a statement that today marks 4 years that Mr. Whelan has spent wrongfully detained away from his family, suffering through an unfathomable ordeal. His detention remains unacceptable, and we continue to press for his immediate release at every opportunity. U.S. President Joe Biden's National Security Advisor, Jake Sullivan, echoed that message, saying, "As the President and I have told the Whelan family, we will not stop, we will not relent, we will not cease until all Americans can celebrate Paul's return." And in the sports, Russian Deputy Prime Minister Dmitry Chernchenko has revealed that the country is preparing a law providing for the staging of sports competitions in new territories, which are widely unrecognized by the international community. In September, Russian President Vladimir Putin signed documents to annex the eastern Ukrainian regions of Luhansk, Donetsk, Zaporizhzhia, and Kherson following a disputed referenda. Sports in the industrial region of Donetsk was severely impacted by the war in Donbass between Ukraine and Russia, which dates back to April 2014, preceding the full-scale invasion earlier this year. This is epitomized by the Donbass Arena, home of one of Ukraine's most successful football clubs, in Shakhtar Donetsk, being damaged by shelling and unused since May of 2014, less than 2 years after it held matches for the 2012 UEFA European Championships. And finally, on the program, power outages in Ukraine's capital did not stop local nail artists from serving their clients. The 18-year-old manicurist Elizaveta Litvichuk moved her workplace to a nearby charity, Invincibility Point, dubbed Greenhouse, founded by volunteers in the area. Equipped with power generators, Invincibility Centers, first an initiative of Ukrainian authorities, have been set up right across the country since November as an attempt to provide shelter and power to Ukrainians during massive blackouts. Ever since, volunteers and locals have started to set up their own invincibility points. Under the lamplight and with gel manicures, power lamps plugged in, Litvichuk provided services to clients sitting next to people charging their phones or working at their laptops. The director of the Charity Point, which hosted Ms. Litvichuk, Andriy Yerofev, said he hoped the initiative would bring strength to the area. Ukraine has suffered massive outages for months after Russian missiles rained on energy infrastructure across the country. Thanks for being with us. That's our program this morning. My name is Ladi Akuri. Do have a pleasant Thursday ahead. Good morning.